Awesome. Marieke, thank you very much for joining us.
Super happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Mo.
I was super impressed looking at your profile on LinkedIn. Why don't you walk people through your career journey? We can kind of stop off at different points. How about that?
Yeah, sure. We can start with that. Okay, so you might hear it from my accent. I'm French. I'm actually a computer science engineer by background, but I finished my studies in China. So I learned Mandarin, lived in Shanghai and then in Hong Kong. And that's where I started my professional career working for LVMH, the big luxury groups giant, which at the time was one, not that big. And two was very entrepreneurial, right? Because we were opening shops literally every week. So it had that, that edge of being extremely entrepreneurial. Anyway, I started my career there in the IT department first, and then moved into the finance department when I worked in Hong Kong as a financial analyst. And that made me realize that I didn't understand anything about business. So I needed to retrain myself, did an
I, w-
MBA, went to, yeah.
I was going to ask, sorry, just to pause that. How did you transition from IT and computer science to finance?
Yeah, well, people, and a lot of people's career are made with like the encounters you have, and it was people. It's basically the vice president of Asia Pacific who took a bet on me because he thought I probably was switched on and could figure it out. So that's what happened, but it's that it's luck,
Wow.
and it's meeting the right people at the right time. So that's the jump I did, but that jump made me realize that I didn't understand business
Okay.
at all,
Okay.
and so I needed to retrain myself. So yeah, so then went to business school. That's when I moved to London and went at London Business School, and very traditional. But going into business school, I thought I was going to work in strategy consulting, so I did that. Went work for BCG. Worked for BCG in Paris for a couple of years. Phenomenal experience, like in terms of how do you craft a story and how do you actually learn to communicate and to think very strategically. But equally, I was missing a sense of operations and being very hands-on and wanting to do things. So that's when I actually shifted gear again, and this time went to work for the first time in tech. And I worked for Expedia, for hotels.com, which at the time was also not as big as it is today. It was an incredible experience, incredible culture, incredible people, learned a lot there, changed job every year for 4 years, and basically grew up to be vice president for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which was quite a large region. And that's when I got one of those moments, which in hindsight, when you look at it, you're like, that's a sliding door moment. But I got a call from a headhunter to work at what he pitched to me at the time as a Bitcoin startup. And I was like, my first reaction was like, well, no, I'm not working for drug dealers, so why are you calling me? But actually, actually, he insisted, and I'm so thankful to him, because he insisted. He said, please read the brief. This is very different, and read it. So I read, and that was to work for Circle. And so that was 10 years ago now. That was
10
to work
years
for,
ago.
that was
Okay.
10 years ago,
Yeah.
10 years ago. So we are now end of 2015. Like, yeah, we
Yeah.
are, I think it's actually in September 2015. I should look back, but I think it's probably 10 years to the day.
Wow.
10 years ago, I had not heard about Bitcoin. I had not heard about crypto. And I basically didn't know that world at all. And so I started looking into it. And I was like, as a technologist, I felt like, oh my God, how did I miss this? This is going to be huge. It's going to transform the world. It's going to transform how money moves. It's going to transform basically everything we do. And so, yeah, I will admit I was a bit terrified to quit, a very good company that is Expedia for something that
Stable
was
company. Yeah.
a stable
Yeah.
company, for something that, was a startup at the time. I think Jeremy had raised by then 10 million. And when I joined, he was closing the other round, so a larger round, but it was very early days. So I jumped into something that was very early day. I became the managing director for Europe, so the first exec outside of the US. And then from there, we grew a lot of products. We had a lot of trial and error. I had to pitch to journalists and regulators what crypto was about, and that, there was something good to make out of it, and that we could move money in the world very differently. So I did that for 4 years. and then also was the chief marketing officer globally of the company. And after that, we shifted gear at Circle. My personal life also changed. I became a mom, and so wanting to do something a bit different. Was recruited to work for Mettle, which is the neobank of NatWest, which again didn't have much. It was an idea and there was a concept, but hadn't launched properly. And I thought, okay, this is unique. Like you have basically a unique setup and a team and a culture that you can create within a bank, and you can also learn from a bank. So did that for 2 years, scaled up what Mettle is today. But today there's also the rest of the stack, which is NatWest Box, which is like a full stack, digital bank. So that's part of that journey. Also during that journey, we had 2 digital banks. We had Bow and Mettle, so had to actually combine both and create it. And all that is during COVID, right? So like it's also, as a leader during COVID times, you're being tested to the to the limit. Yeah, so it's really tough. So yes, we did that for 2 years. We partly exited the business actually to a large PE fund. And I was recruited again, this time to go back in crypto. And that was when I joined Near Foundation. So a very large layer 1 protocol, moved to Switzerland for the job, and something very different, like leading an ecosystem is very, very different. We had a $2 billion treasury. How do you actually manage that? What do you invest in? How do you scale that up? How do you grow that? So when basically there saw the growth of the network from 50,000 monthly active users to 14 million monthly active users. And so that was like an incredible ride. And more recently, so over the last year and a half, now I'm what do you say, independent. So I do board. I sit on different boards. So for example, I'm on the board of IG Group, which is a publicly listed company in the UK. I do angel invest and advise, and also join boards of startups. I do advisory work, in particular in the context of digital asset and stablecoin. And I co-author a newsletter which is called Euro Stable Watch, which is all about stablecoins, and in particular the lack of stablecoins that are not in US dollar, and therefore like the geopolitical impact of that, and how we should think about that. And that's it. Most people have already left. This is too long a story. Yeah, I know.
The journey, I have to say, I don't really know. I mean, obviously I've done a bit of research, but I still don't know. There's so many questions I have. I'm like, where do I start? I don't wanna overwhelm you in the audience. Why don't we start then with 2015
Yep.
Circle, and you got that call, and as you said, even until very, very recently, the impression with crypto has been bad things, like trying to do things outside of the system for some bad reason, and banks and often us sometimes, even at Griffin, we've stayed away. But what gave you the conviction in 2015 to say yes to Jeremy and Circle, back when it wasn't fashionable?
When it wasn't a thing, yeah. I think, look, it's looking at the world like a technologist. So to me, if we're able to send and receive pictures or emails in a certain way, why can we not send money the same way? And that's actually what's always been the drive, is like there should be an easier way to do that. It should actually move much more seamlessly. So it's really a technologist appetite. And then, the other thing, when I read the Bitcoin white paper, and I think it's very fascinating. Like people who are in the industry, you always have aha moments. But I remember reading the Bitcoin white paper. I can tell you where I was when I read it. And I was like, oh my God, this thing is just like, you've now created a system where you don't need to trust anyone to send something that is actually unique and digitally. And that just, that blew my mind for many different reasons. And at the time, Ethereum was not even a thing. Like it was like kind of really sad, but we were not talking, we were mostly talking about Bitcoin and a bit about Ethereum. So I think it's really that, is this idea that money can move differently. And therefore it means that there is a ton of people who are not banked. There's actually a ton of places where you cannot have access and you cannot send microtransactions. And now you can. So imagine a world where you can actually do that, right? That's what got me into it. That's still what motivates me to be into it, and to see that the world is changing a lot thanks to that technology.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. That assumption, I think a lot of us have held that, money is difficult to move even in a digital world. But then, yes, is an alternative that is showing itself and proving itself. And obviously there's a long way to go, but it is completely fascinating how these two things, like technology and the financial system, are mixing together. And yeah, you were at the forefront. You are at the forefront of that journey. How do you see things changing today if we stay on this kind
Yeah.
of stable coin and blockchain topic? How do you see things developing today?
Yeah, look, I mean, massive. I'll give you a very vivid example. I'm just back from Sibos, which is a very large conference. I think it's on a conference organized by Swift, and there is literally almost every bank in the world is at that conference. And I actually remember going to Sibos 9 years ago to pitch Circle Pay, and at the time, journalists thought we were crazy. And people were like, didn't understand what we were doing. And literally, I was like, why would you need to send and receive money like you send and receive money on the internet? And today in Sibos, there's not a day that's going through without a major announcement, which is actually, Swift is now building on Linea to have like better correspondent banking transactions and messaging. You have, a consortium of 9 European banks that are joining forces to launch a euro stablecoin. You have Circle working with Deutsche Börse. You have like Visa now accepting stablecoin. You have Stripe literally doing an announcement on major, innovations that are there. And I can tell you, like, I'm in groups with folks, and we talk a lot about obviously stablecoins. We cannot keep up. It's just the amount of announcement and product releases and launches. So it's like it feels like it's been very long. And I can tell you, for being at the frontier of that, and where we were talking to regulators 10 years ago, and where we were actually trying to get adoption and talking to banks and so on and so forth, like, it was really hard work. Like, it was more doors getting slammed in your face than actually people telling you that there was something there. And now it's completely the opposite. It's like a huge vacuum, right? Like, so now there's a huge appetite for it, and to understand where things could go. And the main shift I see is this, traditional financial institutions adoption. I think also there is a reckoning for our governments of what this could mean. There is a waking call in terms of, this money is unstoppable, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about that, but 99% of stablecoins today are in US dollar. It is unstoppable money. We're living an Uber moment of money. I think we're actually living a new Bretton Woods moment, except people are not in the meeting room to talk about how to reorder the financial world. It's like behind keyboards, and it's been going on for 10 years, right? So yeah, things are dramatically changing, and the acceleration adoption of that is just phenomenal to see.
Completely agree, in the sense of, like, between AI and stable coins in particular, I really, really cannot keep up. I think this week, even the number of the new models, the Swift announcement, Stripe announcing issuance with Bridge, like, what do we do? Can we get a moment to pause and breathe? But it's also really, really exciting to be in this industry at this point in time. But you mentioned something very interesting, and like this Bretton Woods moment, and 99% of stablecoins being in USD. What do you think Europe needs to do to, should I use the words catch up, or
Yeah, wake up.
yeah?
Well, yeah, several things. So look, this Bretton Woods moment is really happening, and here's why it matters. I always start with that because actually there is still a perception that, stablecoins in particular are used for crypto trading. They're not. I was on a panel last week with Fireblocks. 50% of Fireblocks volume on stablecoins come from non-crypto. 50%. So like, it's huge. That's the numbers we're talking about. So it's not. But more importantly than that, and you talked about AI, and actually there is a very good, marriage between AI and crypto, and in particular stablecoins. Imagine a world not that far out. AI agents need wallets, need to do payments. Guess what they're going to use? Stablecoin rails. That's like the ideal rails. AI talks tokens, blockchain talks tokens. The way to have microtransactions and do all that is going to be with stablecoin rails. So in the future, those rails are going to power AI agents. In the future, a lot of conversations and actually action is happening on real world asset tokenization. What does that mean? It means like, our assets, whether they're bonds or whether they're stock, or maybe whether they're in the future going to be like, householding or whatever, are also going to be tokenized, and therefore their transactions are also going to happen on blockchain, and therefore so with stablecoin. So what I'm trying to say is that what matters is that those are the rails of the future. And if you look at the rails of the future, and if your currency, whatever country you're actually, whether you are, the UK and therefore the British pound, or whether you're the Eurozone and with the euro and so on and so forth, if your currency is not on those rails, then your future is not going to exist in that. So it is very urgent to do something. I think in Europe, unfortunately, we think we were first to do a good regulation, but that's not enough. And actually, it should not be a fame to claim to have been first to do MiCA. And it shouldn't be a fame to claim to have been talking about a digital euro for the last 4 years. But it should be actually of great concern that there is no volume of any shape or form in any of the actually player or companies that are out there trying to do euro stablecoin. So within that context, actually, I think it's important to look at the history of the euro and where it comes from. And if you look at the history of the euro was created as a peacemaking tool. It's actually a tool first to unify ourselves post-World War II. And that's the premise of it. And therefore, it means that our institutions after that are also built on that premise, which means that you still have independence from, France central bank is independent from the German central bank, but yet they work with the European central bank. Our bonds market is also very fragmented. So all of that means that actually the history of the euro is very specific. It's not the US one. Our bonds market is different. Our central bank structure is different. And so what it means that in that context, Europe needs to have an answer. And that's why I'm actually particularly excited about this consortium of banks getting together, because that might be exactly the answer that Europe needs to have some sort of stablecoin that has enough depth and liquidity and volume to be able to participate in that.
Wow, it is fascinating. But the thing that really sticks with me is the why it matters that you said at the beginning. The fact that there are going to be or the need for all of these microtransactions when these agents are talking to each other and we barely have a clue. Like, I think the other example was, if I'm not mistaken, Cloudflare saying they're going to have their own stablecoin. Why? Because they want to be able to charge and monetize that time that AI agent goes onto that website to read the data and then go back and give it. Which, as a marketeer, when we think about incentives for actually creating content and putting things on the website, is obviously incredibly relevant. But it just, to your point, I think it just goes to show the way that money is going to move is just completely different in this new era.
Right.
Quite sometimes scary when I think about it. But
I mean, it's
also
changed. It's changed. It's new. I mean, it's changed, but it's been going on for like 10 years, right? Like over a decade. And I think, it shouldn't feel scary. It feels like there is opportunity, but equally it's not the time to stay asleep at the wheel, because things are changing very, very fast. And again, technology can spread extremely quickly, right? So the adoption of what we're seeing, in particular in AI, is like, it can really spark very fast. So it's not the time to be asleep, indeed.
No, for sure. What do you think about central bank digital currencies and centralized stable coins, as opposed to what we currently seem to be seeing is a lot of private stable coins, and that seems to be the way the USD stable coins are going. What do you think is going to happen here? Like, I have a kind of theory in my head that maybe there's going to be convergence, but I'd love to hear what your take.
Yeah. So actually, I think there is a new stack of money that will be designed, and here's the thought process on that. If you look today at the US, it's true the US is going full on stablecoins, right? The Genius regulation says like go on stablecoins, and that's the path forward. The US is very clearly saying no to a retail CBDC for surveillance purpose, right? So it is saying there should never be a retail CBDC, because it means that the state could surveil where its citizens are spending money. And the US is actually also seeing quite a large number of banks doing tokenized deposits. So that's the situation we have in the US. In Europe, actually, we have a different situation. And in Europe, what's happening is that we do have MiCA, which actually lays the ground for stable coins, but we have very few players in stable coins. We have the Central Bank of Europe, which is doing two types of CBDC. One is a wholesale CBDC, and one is this digital euro, which is actually a retail CBDC. And we don't really have banks, doing tokenized deposit, but that's a little bit the context. And then in the UK, actually, what you have is that you have, banks coming together doing tokenized deposits, and then there is texts that are being written for what stablecoins should look like, and CBDC is not really talked about. And then in Asia, again, different things, like China has been doing a lot of wholesale, retail CBDC, now doing stablecoin via Hong Kong. So the premise is that in the world, for the first time, I think in history, central banks are not aligned on how money flows in the future and what it looks like. However, I think, there will be a new stack of money that will play out, whereby you need wholesale CBDC, because that's actually, if you still believe central banks should exist to print money and to have some sort of control of how much is emitted, then you have wholesale CBDC. That's your source of truth. Then tokenized deposits are actually very interesting to have, between banks themselves and banks between also large corporates. And that can be a DOS to, in some shape or form, not 100%, but like it can be a DOS to wholesale CBDC. And then you have stable coins, which are the retail version, which is like the fintech of our time. It's like the adoption layer of it, right? And therefore, that's actually the thing that could be backed in part with tokenized deposit or wholesale CBDC, but it's a stack. And therefore, in that stack, then you have that. So I don't think it's going to be convergence. I think it's going to be layered, because again, every version of fiat money in that sense, whether it's wholesale CBDC, tokenized deposit, or stablecoin, has a role to play. I'm very anti-retail CBDC. I think actually for a whole bunch of reasons, that's completely not the right path, because, also it doesn't, if you're doing that, what's the role then of the central bank? Like, do you even need banks? Like, why would you have that? I don't think it's that. And I think also for surveillance purpose, why would a central bank want to know or limit how much its citizen can actually own in terms of CBDC? So I don't think that makes sense, but I think a wholesale CBDC DOSes the system, enable this future tokenization, and make completely sense. So that's one part of the question. The second part of your question was on centralized versus decentralized. Look, I think I'm more skeptical usually of things that are very algorithmic, because I think they are fine until they're not. And I think the limit of all those algorithmic stablecoins very often is the limit of what we can think of. And therefore, can we anticipate any black swan event that's going to happen? No, we can't, right? And I think that's where, when you look at players like Circle, who are audited, who are, yes, centralized, but who can give some sort of certainty, I think that's actually a very good path forward. And that gives actually, legitimacy to ultimately a stablecoin, which is like, it's the retail part, it's the adoption part of that currency, right? So I think that's where it makes sense. Again, I think, there's some very interesting projects like Athena and so on. Let's see when things go really wrong, like if there are black swan events in our economies, then how are they going to, stay stable? Can they stay stable? I lived through Terra Luna. I still have scars from that. So I think, anything that's not very, very, very transparent and square, I tend to doubt a lot.
It's fascinating how you described that new stack of money. I think that, especially, I think as you were explaining that, my mind was thinking about, I was kind of trying to mirror the stack against like how transactions will also change.
Yes.
And it kind of, at least instinctively makes sense. Because one of the questions I've had come up just recently as well, like as of yesterday in this bridge issuance announcement, is that part around adoption. Like, I can understand why, if you are an FX player, why you will adopt different stable coins to help move money around the world. But if you are an individual who is, I don't know, going to buy groceries or do online shopping or whatever it might be, like, do you think stable coins will kind of penetrate that retail layer, or do you think they will stay as kind of like this B2B and more transactional?
So I think depends where you live. So for example, if you live in Nigeria or if you live in Venezuela, actually, why do you use stablecoin? You use them because your own currency is actually probably not stable, and therefore you want to go into something that is stable. And I think therefore in those countries, the risk is that, it becomes so prevalent that the entire economy continues working on stablecoin. I had a recent conversation with someone who was telling me, yeah, but maybe it's not actually going to have more propensity because those countries already use dollar. I actually think it will, because now there's no friction. Think of it like, when Uber arrived, are people using more car sharing than they were booking taxis before? Yes, they are, because now you can actually, with Uber, it's actually easier. So this is very similar in the sense that now it is much more available, therefore it will permeate more the system. So I think that's one part of the use case. In our economies, and that's also something I hear a lot, it's like, well, we don't need stablecoins because we have, we have our internal digital money works really well. And so, within Europe, we have SEPA, why would we need that? And actually, within Switzerland, we have like digital money and we have Twint, and it's perfectly fine. But that's not the use case, actually. The use case is not necessarily for our intra and for paying the bus and paying our groceries. The use case is really this broader, widespread adoption, which can happen through retail adoption. One use case I give to say, here's why we need to think about it. Imagine a world where Amazon actually has its own stablecoin. And Amazon is very prevalent anywhere in the world. And if I use Amazon stablecoin, then I get 10% off for buying stuff on Amazon. Well, I will do that, right? Even if it's not my own currency, I will do that because it's like, it's loyalty points. Look at the effort people make to take the right airline to get their miles. This is on steroid, right? So therefore, the threat to our systems, and what I mean by that, the threat to our monies, in the context of our countries, is more than actually it's going to be so prevalent and so easy to use. So the argument is not that we don't need it because we have what we need and it's fine. It's more that it's going to permeate the entire system, and before you know it, everything's going to work in dollar. And I think we should just ask ourselves, are we okay with that, right? And maybe some countries are, and maybe some are not, right? So I think that's more the way to think about it, and therefore it's not today buying our sandwiches. It's more like, the way it permeates, and therefore what it means for the future.
That's such a good point. Yeah, especially that change of behavior point, and the Uber analogy hits hard. I can attest to that. I do use taxis more thanks to Uber. We could talk about this for a few hours at least. It's absolutely fascinating. But we like to also talk about kind of personal journeys on this podcast, and like what it's actually like, kind of like behind the scenes. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier when you were the CEO of Mettle, and how difficult that was during COVID, the COVID element. But yeah, if we step into kind of that era of your career, those few years, what was that like, being part of a digital bank that is doing things in this incredibly modern way, connected to one of the biggest banks in the UK that has a huge kind of legacy infrastructure and things?
Yeah, look, I learned like a lot. And I think actually doing innovation in any large structure is very difficult because two things. You need to keep the big ship continuing. You cannot afford to not have that run, and that has to continue. And at the same time, you need to think strategically how to innovate and how to keep up with all those new trends and therefore what's happening. And very often the culture of those two boats is actually very, very different, right? And I think at Mettle, actually, what we did right, which is a masterclass in innovation, is that we were, yes, part of the mothership, but we actually had a very different setup. Everything from Slack to Gmail to a different culture to an ability to recruit, people who were independent from the bank. And so that enables to create this culture of how even we built product, right? Like we were building product. You wouldn't have seen a difference between the way we were building product to actually how a fintech or a tech company was building product. But yet we had the oversight and the, dozens or decades of knowledge of what it means to do risk and think crime, and actually what it means to be a bank and what it means to think through and all of that, right? So yes, it is not easy because you constantly have this tension. And very often, people were looking at us from the bank saying like, why are we wasting money on this thing? That was literally that, because when you're building a startup, the beginning is like, you invest in it and you hope that at some point it's going to create meaningful profit, which it does today. So the bet was the right one, but you need to have the stamina to say at the beginning, like, it's okay. You let them on the side, they learn, they grow. And over time, actually, when you need it, then the stack will be ready and you can start floating otherwise. Again, the biggest learning for me is that doing innovation in a large organization that has so much at stake and therefore cannot let the bigger part go wrong is very difficult. But equally, we fed on each other. Like we were doing a lot of sort of cross-sharing of how we thought about recruiting people, because the way we were recruiting was, different. And the way we were assessing people was different. And the way we were working was different. And the way we were actually, able to communicate using Slack and using things like that. It makes a small difference. But there's nothing like, to me, a Microsoft tool, even for chatting, doesn't have the flavor that a Slack would have. I can't explain it, but so being able to do things like that, you can push the bigger organization, and the bigger organization can also make you think more like, when you scale, are you going to be ready, right? And we didn't take shortcut, which in hindsight is phenomenal, because then when you scale, you're really ready to actually do that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds silly when I'm about to even say it. But yeah, like those small tiny things around like, what chat app do you use, what email
Makes a
client do
difference.
you use? They just have these subconscious signals that then changes the culture as a whole. Like these things compound when you scale them across even a small organization. But that's fascinating how, yeah, I think especially when you mention the risk and compliance point, because that obviously in the last kind of decade has been a big tripping point for a lot of like fintechs, especially. We've tried to be as super careful, and that's kind of embedded in our culture to be very, very strict on that type of thing. But it makes sense when you say, yeah, you have that benefit of the bigger group.
Learning.
Kind of,
Exactly.
yeah. Very, very interesting. One thing I think, if I may say so, I've noticed in your career journey is, yeah, you've taken a lot of small things and kind of grown them, taken them to their potential, and it's super fascinating. Now, as an angel investor, what type of investment do you look for? And I was going to ask, like, what type of advice do you give founders nowadays in 2025's kind of environment?
Yeah. Okay. So two very big questions. I think for angel investments, I wouldn't say I'm, proactively looking for things, actually not, but I'm very, very passionate. So I will do things that I believe in and things that I want to back, right? So for example, recently there is this incredible founder. She's launching an app called 28X. It's about women health. And the way she approaches it is privacy first. And I think it is actually extremely important because we don't have those tools today. So that's one thing I do. Another thing is I had the luck to be introduced actually by my father to an entrepreneur, French entrepreneur, who is a geologist by background, but has actually developed technology to be able to find natural hydrogen. And natural hydrogen, turns out, could be a huge source of energy that is actually clean energy and that can help power a lot of the transition that we need. And so, I got involved because I thought, one, the entrepreneur is phenomenal, but two, like, this is actually solving, a very big problem. So it's more, things like that I do, where I think, where is it that you can, make a difference, and therefore like do things that you believe in and that, amplify the impact you can have. I think, in terms of advice for entrepreneurs today or for founders, today, if you build a company, you cannot not look at AI. And so, for example, I also do investments in AI because I think, one, it's fascinating to be at the frontier of that and to be, to be participating. But two, also to have this ability to learn. And I think the companies I'm seeing today are being built completely differently. And with a team of, there is one company, it's a team of two. They're called Chaos. And actually, when you look at them with two people, what they do is like, it's 20. Like, it's completely mind blowing. And so that's the world we're in, right? So, advice for entrepreneurs and founders is very often along those lines of like, you cannot ignore certain technologies. You have to stay very agile and very, very nimble. And the other thing is also like, you have to look who you surround yourself with very early, right? So for example, now, being on boards, I also see, boards can be an effect multiplicator. So it can be your superpower, and it can push you and give you even more strengths that you would have. But equally, if you don't have the right advisors or the right, board around yourself, it can actually do the other effect. So I think that's also something not to underestimate, is like, how do you actually build that, surround yourself with the right people, and don't see governance or board as like an afterthought or something that you'll do later when you have time. Or if done right, it can be extremely powerful. But yeah, I think there's been no better time to build something. As an independent, it feels to me like as if I have a team, which is weird, but because I don't have a team anymore, but I have a bunch of agents, helping with stuff. So I'm like, we're living incredible times of, like this massive innovation, new products coming all the time that enables us to do our work differently, and therefore like to create, invent, and also like do things differently. So as an entrepreneur, you have to stay a put of that, right? Which is difficult because you have your day-to-day job, but you still have to learn and make space for all that stuff.
Do you think that the shape of companies is going to change in the next kind of 5 to 10 years?
I think so. Yes. Okay. But this is very interesting because from a larger corp perspective, getting AI embedded and adopted and used, it's difficult, right? And why is it difficult? Because it's a culture thing. It's actually a culture thing. Like, how do you use it? Why do you use it? How is it embedded? And like, so it's still the factor of adoption remains a human factor first and foremost. But equally, so I think, how much transformation can they be on large corp? I think still TBD. And you can see that happening in particular call centers. You can see that happening even in engineering, in like how you can actually handle coding or bug fixing. So like there's a huge transformation that's underway. How much and how deep will it go, to be seen? But I think what's really interesting is like new companies being started. It's a different shape. It's like it's a shape that we didn't have, 10 years ago when we were thinking, okay, you'll have your CEO and your CEO and your CBO. Like it's a different shape, right? So I think that is very interesting to keep an eye on. And we're starting to see companies of 20 people be like $billion valuation, like stuff that was completely unimaginable a few months ago even. So I think that's very interesting to see. And then the problem becomes like, okay, so, what's the end game of both worlds? Like, what does it look like at the intersection of, do they intersect or not? But yeah, so it's like, one is like an adoption of technology, which ultimately is human, how much culture you can adopt. And the other one is like from scratch, things are being built very, very differently.
It is a fascinating world to be in right
Indeed.
now.
Indeed.
Goodness me. Marieke, thank you so, so much for indulging us in this like really wide-ranging conversation. Reminder for people that you write, it's the Eurostable Watch newsletter, correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So if people would like to hear more from you, then definitely subscribe to that. But yeah, very, very grateful for the time. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm super excited for us to get it out there and share it.
Wow. Thank you so much for the great question. It's always a privilege to be able to share to share a story. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Awesome.